I've got a concern that arises as a result of trends and bad habits, if you will, that I've seen happening for years in this field, which are actually somewhat accentuated right now as a result of the responses that companies did for the COVID pandemic. For years, we've been underfunding maintenance. We've spent as little as possible, often thinking that by cutting costs, we're doing good and helping our companies be profitable. Of course, cutting costs in maintenance can backfire, as some already know. It's important to do the right maintenance and do it the right way. If you cut back too much, you either stop doing some of that maintenance or you stop doing it the right way. And when that happens, equipment is prone to failure. During the COVID pandemic, companies were forced very quickly to basically change the way they were operating. They sent people home. Contracts were often curtailed. Any kind of training or improvement initiatives, for the most part, were set aside, and spending was cut dramatically in just about everything. It forced a change in the way that maintainers work. They're still needed on site to do their work, but shift arrangements were moved around. You didn't have the contractors there to rely on. You had to learn some new skills. There was a whole lot of change that took place, and it happened very rapidly. Now, during this extended period that we've been suffering through COVID, it's getting close to 18 months, I believe it is now. We've seen another 18 months of very experienced older tradesmen leaving the workforce, baby boomers retiring. Now, they were already retiring in big numbers before COVID hit. Many of them were sent home during COVID, kind of like being there and don't want to go back. The result of that is 18 months of people retiring in the United States alone. That's about 1,000 people a day retiring. Think about that for 18 months. That's an awful lot of retirees. And these are the most experienced workers you have. So companies have lost a huge amount of experience and knowledge of how things work, how they break, who does what, all kinds of little nuanced knowledge that's in their heads, and it's now gone. Some still remain, of course, but not that many. The people coming in to take the place are typically young. Well, they're always younger. They are probably better skilled with computers and technology, but not as experienced on the tools. And if you were having trouble finding skilled trades before COVID, you're in for some nasty surprises now, because it's much, much worse. Many people simply just don't want to go back to the old ways of working, and consequently, that's made what was already a bad situation much worse. So what does that result in? During COVID, many companies were able to curtail production. They had to. Demand was down. Supplies were harder to get. Supply chains were stretched, so costs of materials were really high. The end result of that is that production levels were down. They were low. And of course, when you run something low, it's not as heavily stressed as when you're running it hard. Kind of makes sense. That means, though, that it's not going to fail and break as often. So during COVID, even though you reduced staffing, reduced maintenance, reduced some of these improvement initiatives, performance of the assets actually probably appeared to be better. And it's because it wasn't being stressed as much. Now, as we're coming out of COVID, of course, companies are trying to ramp up. They're discovering they can't find trades anymore. They've lost experience and expertise. They still have trouble getting material through supply chains because there's so many border issues still in place as a result of COVID. Materials, the cost of materials has skyrocketed for just about everything. And of course, they're now ramping up the production levels. So those stresses, the physical stresses that we engineers all know about, are now coming back onto those production systems. So those systems are going to be working harder. And nothing's been done to make them actually work any better. They had a little bit of a break, but now it's back up to full load. That's going to continue to stress the assets as they were before COVID, and they're going to start failing as often as they did before COVID. And you're now in a
Maybe even
poorer
more.
position. Perhaps even more, yes, because they've had 18 months of running with very little maintenance done to them. That's a good point, Richard. Thank you. And of course, the result of that is going to be more failures and more difficulty in correcting them because of the loss of expertise and talent. So I see kind of a perfect storm coming. It's going to be a bit of a maintenance nightmare for a while.
And to enhance that storm, perfect storm, the trend before COVID was, what's the first thing to get cut? Training, the focus on software in terms of a CMMS, reliability centered maintenance. What are the 7 questions? That trend has been exasperated by COVID. Training is cut or doesn't occur. And now with the, as Jim said, with the expertise retiring, where does that leave the people coming in?
Oh, that's a really good point. I'm seeing this in my client base now. Some are actually starting to look for training. Interestingly, they haven't shifted their thinking entirely yet. There is still some thinking that, yeah, you can go on site and do it live. And of course, as soon as you start talking about it, the awareness hits, oh, wait, we're not allowed to have people on site anymore. And so can you do this virtually? And of course, the answer is yes. In some situations, that works quite well. But time zones become a bit of an issue because you're not traveling. You're not in the same time zone with the client necessarily. And here in North America, I think it's 5 time zones from east to west. You could be quite offset from them. In one client that I'm working with right now, they've got a couple of operations in Europe, a couple in Latin America, and a couple in North America. And the time zone width is substantial. So if you're doing something for all of them, it's tough to time a virtual session. And of course, you're still paying for the time of the person presenting as well as the whatever materials and that are needed. You're saving on travel costs, and that's about it. The newer option, of course, is online training, fully pre-recorded and self-paced. I've put most of my training online like that, but I'm still seeing a fairly low demand for it at the moment, where it's been built into projects with clients. It's getting used quite extensively. And people are very happy with it, but where it's not built into a project and people are simply looking for training, they very much still prefer the live experience, and the face-to-face version of that just isn't going to happen anymore. Certainly not in most cases. And the virtual experience, although people think it's sort of the next best thing, and they'll argue that they want that rather than pre-recorded because then they can have interaction with the instructor. Well, my own experience with it, and for the last 18 months, I've been doing sessions like that. They don't interact. I sit here and stare at a screen full of initials, all on mute. And maybe someone will type something in the chat box once in a blue moon. So the level of interaction that you think is enabled and is indeed enabled just isn't being taken advantage of. So I kind of wonder if that's really going to last long. And you still need to coordinate everybody together to get them there to watch it at the same time. From the client's perspective, it's not much different than a live on-site course, except for the loss of or the reduction in traveling costs that might come with it. They still have all the logistics of get the people in the room. If it's maintenance trades, for example, they don't always have computers available to them. So you've got to set this up now in a meeting room with a projector. And these are things that some companies find a little bit awkward to do because they're not everyday things that they're managing.
That's the thing. It's a physical maintenance is a physical thing. And to now make it virtual, especially when you're working with machinery and on how to work with machinery, you got to be there and look at the parts and look at all the things to really get a sense of what you're going to be doing.
Well, that's right. And some training for trades requires that. So you're not going to get away from live training, particularly where skills on the tools and with the equipment are needed. That's going to be live forever, I believe. But for anything,
there are also a lot of headaches with the training, right? So is everything in place? Have you prepared in this virtual reality, like the current project I'm on? One of the challenges is it's all virtual training. And in terms of the cell phones, are they properly set up? Do you have everything in place in order for that training to go smoothly? Because there's nothing more frustrating for the people receiving the training than to have to stop because, oh, it's time for a break because the cell phone's not set up correctly.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
So,
are they even paying attention sometimes?
right. So they go for break, and once they're gone, they're gone. They don't come back.
So what's looming here? Are we just waiting, sitting ducks, waiting for catastrophes to
Well,
now
before
start
we
popping off?
answer what's looming, let's add in another dimension, and that is data has been so poor and non-existent. With COVID, it's going to become really clear how bad our data is in all these organizations. So,
Uh-oh.
They were
so
doing a
there's your
terrible
fourth one.
job.
Yeah.
There was a terrible job being done collecting data before COVID, and I'm sure during COVID, because of reduced staffing and all that,
It's even worse.
the emphasis is on get on the tools and get stuff fixed, not let's clean up the paperwork afterwards, right? And maintainers never did like doing that anyway. So I don't see that problem going away anytime soon. It's probably, and as Richard says, I'm sure it's worse.
I do feel that
The
energy
training,
now.
I wouldn't say the training is any less effective. I think the face-to-face had its drawbacks. Not everybody likes sitting in a classroom. And when it's face-to-face, like if I was doing an RCM course, for example, on site, it would be 2 very full days. And most of the people I'm teaching are not used to being in a classroom for a full day. So it was tough to keep them engaged.
Exactly.
With live virtual, you can spread it out more, but you've got the problem of them staying engaged online now, and they can hide, right? They can leave everything running, mute themselves, turn their video off. You don't even know if they're there. And you can ask them questions, and of course, you find out if they're there or not because they don't answer. Even if they are there, they fumble around to figure out how to unmute themselves so that they can answer. So
like 20 minutes after the question was asked.
Sometimes the live virtual is, I find a little awkward because of that. You can't quite go at the same pace you would if it was a classroom. You do have struggles with technology all the way through it. Just this past week, I did a 5-day long course with some colleagues from the University of Toronto, and we had an audience of I think it was 11 or 12 students in this class. Every day we started half an hour early just so people could get the technology working. And every day somebody had a problem. And they might leave, right? If they leave and happen to close their browser, now they got to come back in. Well, you as the host who are instructing, you have to admit them to the room. And while you're presenting, say a PowerPoint, that's all you see on your screen. The little, so-and-so's waiting to be admitted notice doesn't show up. So somebody else ends up interrupting. And
so a lot of times in my own training, I'll do exercises that are kind of off the wall. And you lose that aspect in a virtual training.
Yeah, you can't do that at all with virtual. I think the attendees, because they're not used to being online, like many of us who've had to work at home for the last 18 months or even longer, they're not used to that. So they think like when it's on a screen, as far as they're concerned, it's like watching TV. It's not an interactive. It's a one-way, dump of information towards them. And when you ask them a question, they're just not prepared for it at all. When it's totally pre-recorded, what I'm finding is there were some big advantages to it. First of all, I'll confess, I'm not a fan of attending it myself. Okay, but it's the new reality. But I'm finding as an instructor, it gives me a lot more flexibility to provide actually a better education experience for them because I can include, say, a quiz after each lesson. You can't do that live or virtual very easily. So, in order for them to move on from lesson 1 to lesson 2, they got to pass a quiz. So it reinforces the learning of the lesson,
Yeah.
and sort of forces them to pace themselves at their own learning pace. They can't skip ahead.
Plus, exactly. I was gonna say that. It's you gotta let them curl up with a nice tea and do it at their own pace.
Yeah, and I've seen people. Some people blast through it really quickly. Others are really slow. And it's I don't think the amount of effort is any different. They're just not absorbing it as well. They struggle with the quizzes. I don't make the quizzes easy to pass, but I don't make them difficult
Okay.
either. They're basically just meant to review material, and very few people get them right on the first try. So there's some reinforcement goes on. At the end of it, in a couple of cases, we've actually used the training to do some work with the client virtually, and the people actually knew what we were talking about. So the training, I found, was perhaps even more effective than it was live, because they got that reinforcement along the way, and then we put it to use right away. And because it wasn't live on site, and I didn't have to travel home for the weekend and back
Mhm.
and all that, which always puts a damper on the cost side of things. We could proceed at a pace that just made much more sense.
Okay.
And they were ready for it. They actually seemed to understand the material better. So you can add the quizzes in, all the handout materials just there. You can just download it. It's dead easy for them. They get copies of the slides. They don't have to ask for them at the end of 2 days. It's just I think it makes for a better learning experience for that type of training, right? It's they don't have to do anything with their hands. So it's not like a skill that they're learning with their hands. All right, this is more of an intellectual skill, and that's very well suited to the training. And Richard, I imagine much of your stuff would be quite similar. It's very amenable to doing.
Very much so, yeah. And like I said, the challenge of the virtual training, the live virtually, is that because it's not interactive, how do you keep the students engaged? Whereas the pre-recorded training, because they're going at their own pace, they're already by default engaged.
Yeah, exactly. Lessons are shorter too, so it's like they don't have to have a huge attention span. Like a course that I would take 2 days will end up being 13 or 14 lessons, and they're all relatively short. And then there's a quiz with each one of them, so it changes up quite a bit, so it makes that experience a little bit better. And another thing I've done, which worked really well with one client, was I used the online training material but taught it in a virtual format. And then at the end of the lessons, they'd have to go and do the quizzes online. So they'd have to go through the online quiz part to get that reinforcement. And then it was an analytical method. We were doing RCM actually. And we do the first few lessons. So they learn how to do the first step of the analysis. And then we actually did the analysis, and we kind of interspersed it with the training. So we do training, analysis, training, analysis, training, analysis on a system of theirs. So the system that we analyzed used kind of as a training mechanism, if you will, but at the end of the day, they've got a very useful analysis completed. And they found a huge amount out about how that system worked that they didn't know before. They found a number of safety hazards they didn't realize they had. They dramatically changed their maintenance program as a result of it. So it does exactly what RCM normally does. And we kind of interspersed it with the training, and that worked incredibly well for that particular client. And it was all done virtually. So they had the live interactive opportunity. Towards the end of the course, people were interacting more, I was finding. And I think part of that was because we were interspersing it with actual analysis. So there was training, analysis work, which forced some interaction because they have to answer questions. And then more training, more questions, more training, more questions. And by the end of it, they were actually asking questions during the training. So that worked out well. A couple of guys missed a couple of lessons. They had the online access. They just went in and took the pre-recorded version.
So that's one good benefit.
It had some really neat benefit to it. And that worked. Like, it was a bit of an experiment. The client was willing to take the chance on it, and it worked way better than either they or I expected it to. So it was a huge lesson learned for me on the delivery of training like that nowadays. And I've recommended it with other clients, and we've actually started doing it with another one now.
There you go. That's
So that's making up for the training, but the companies still have to be willing to spend on the training. And during the
okay.
COVID period,
So
with
the
all the uncertainty, people weren't spending. They just stopped. So
Yeah.
anything that was discretionary stopped. Training, consultants, contractors, overtime. If you spent anything extra on it, it was curtailed.
And the maintenance
that
of
meant-
a lot of assets, right? The asset's no longer running. We don't need to maintain it. You know, except if
Exactly.
you think of your car, right? You don't, maybe you're not running it, but you still need to maintain it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
Otherwise,
they
when
got
you
away
need
with it.
to go to the grocery store, it may not start for you.
Yeah, they got away with it. It's like PM in normal times. You can back off on doing the PMs for a while, and it will save you a little bit of money. But eventually, and probably within a month or two, you're going to start to see failures that you were previously preventing or avoiding, and it'll bite you. It'll come back and lead to additional failures. And of course, you're now reacting to them. Repairs are more costly than doing things proactively. Cost cutting there is always, like playing Russian roulette. And,
I mean,
and,
I'm
and
really
six,
impressed with
and
the
out of
current
6 bullets in
project
the
I'm
chamber,
on.
5, only 1 is empty, right? So
The current project I'm on, I'm really impressed because their philosophy was polar opposite of the trends you're seeing out there, which was, well, our assets aren't running at the moment. It's time to do maintenance on them for years of neglect that we
Whoa.
couldn't get to those assets. They're actually doing the maintenance that they couldn't get done over
That's
the years
smart.
because they were operating at, 95, 97% capacity.
yeah. And that's that's really good.
That's rare.
And it's rare. Most of the companies I've talked to have kind of gone the other way.
Exactly.
The dark side, you mean?
The dark side, yeah.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. And it is a dark side. And they got away with it. Good for them during COVID, they got away with it. But boy, when things start ramping up,
Yeah.
it's just a really nasty situation. And I'm already seeing in the news evidence that all these really ghastly concerns that we have are coming true already. Now I don't know all the causes of some of the failures that I've seen in the news, but there was a chicken facility down in, I think it was in Georgia, that suffered a major failure on a brand new system as at a time when maintenance was being done. Okay, now still investigating it. The investigation will drag on for another 1.5 years or so. By then, everybody will have forgotten the incident if they haven't already. So the lessons that we learn from these things take a long time to become publicly available.
Yeah.
And by then, the impact of it is lost. There was a paint facility in Columbus, Ohio, a few months ago. There was another facility just outside Chicago, if I recall, that had a big problem. Just in the news a couple of days ago, Pemex oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, major fire maintenance was being done.
That went viral.
Yeah, well, I actually put it up on my own LinkedIn feed.
Yeah.
It's on it, and I'm just asking questions. How well trained were the people that were doing the work? One fellow said, well, contractors, maybe they were better trained, maybe. But the fact remains they were doing some kind of maintenance when this happened. And that is a common factor in a lot of these incidents that I'm seeing right now, is that the accidents are happening and maintenance is being done. Something's wrong here. What is it? Right? What have we been cutting back on? What have we
probably the 5 things we talked about, a collection of all those things.
Well, before COVID, those were problems. That really hasn't changed. What's different in COVID is that there's this long period of lower levels of production that I think lulled people into this sense of security that's really false. Right? They think it's okay because they got away with it. And it's not okay at all. In fact, it's probably worse than it was before. And it just hasn't hit them So that's my big concern these days. And I've been blogging about it. I've been writing articles about it, talking about it. I'm just hoping people pay attention and people that can do something about it, right? Our typical audience in this field is a maintainer, maybe a manager of maintenance, and they frankly don't have an awful lot of authority to change anything. Like
They don't.
They're kind of told, look, here's how much money you got to spend, and you spend it wisely. They do the best they can with limited resources, and then accounting will come along and say, hey, can you cut another 10%? You know, I've advised a few clients of mine, you know, next time they ask you to save some money, ask them which equipment you're allowed to let fail and stay down, because that'll be the equipment that you won't maintain now. It's a bit of a wake-up call for those who are asking you to keep cutting and cutting and cutting. You cannot cut your way to prosperity ever. And you know, in maintenance, spending less is not always a smart thing to do. It's an expense the way the accountants
We
treat it.
need to change the paradigm, right? From maintenance as a cost factor to maintenance as an investment. Because you're making an investment in your asset.
And that's kind of tough, I think, for the accounting world to wrap its brain around, because you know, maintenance is, from an accounting perspective, an expense. It's not an asset that you're investing, you know, you're spending money to buy, and are, you know, so it's not treated like an asset in the sense that financial world thinks of assets. It doesn't depreciate or appreciate. You can't write off the capital cost over years.
It's a chore. It's just a chore you paid for.
Yeah, and chores are expenses, and expenses are, by, you know, in the accounting world, look, it's like a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. You're spending money on it. You know, the smartest thing to do is stop spending, and so the accountants tend to drive us in that direction, and the senior management folks often have operations background or accounting and finance backgrounds, maybe marketing when you get into the very senior levels. They rarely have an engineering or almost never have a maintenance or operations. Yeah, maintenance, they don't get it. You know, they talk about reliability, but they really don't know what they're talking about. They have a sense, which is correct, but they really don't understand it in any depth at all. And consequently, when the maintenance manager, who's up to his rear end in alligators trying to keep things going, is asking for, look, I need more money to do this training so that we can put this PM program in place, or I need this training for the guys so that they can learn how to do alignments better and we can eliminate alignment. Like, those requests fall on deaf ears because the people that we're talking to don't understand it. And most maintenance guys don't have enough time on their hands to really explain it well. And consequently, they frankly, they don't make very good salesmen. And they have to sell their ideas to their bosses.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all. It's just the way it is. And there's nothing that teaches operations people, finance people about the value of reliability and maintenance. Nobody gets taught that. You know, there's not a single course on it in an MBA program anywhere. I'm sure of that. Even engineering programs don't talk about it until you get to the master's level. And at that point, you're actually specializing in it.
Wow.
You know, your engineering graduates I don't remember maintenance ever being mentioned once when I was in university. That was a long time ago. And my memory is probably fading a bit, but I'm pretty sure they talk about it. You know, it's just not.
And it's definitely not at the MBA level either. Didn't know about maintenance till I joined the airport. Let's put it that way.
And you know, you talk to people that are in maintenance. How did you get there? Most of them will tell you it was some kind of an accident, right?
Exactly.
Mind blowing.
Even me, I started my career as a naval engineer in the Navy, and you're operating ships, but you're also maintaining them. And that was just like, that's just part of the job. But the maintenance part was by far the most challenging.
But come on. You guys heard my intro. You guys are the heroes. You guys are, it's crazy how it's.
Yeah, most of us got into it kind of by accident. It's not that you study it, make it as, it's not a choice in college, it's not a choice in university. It's something that you sort of fall into and learn on the way. Some learn better than others.
That's it.
And a lot of managers in maintenance have come up off the tools, and they have tremendous experience with the equipment that they're used to maintaining, but not necessarily broad understanding of how things fail in a more general sense, that the reliability knowledge is limited to those assets that they're familiar with.
And the other challenge for them is they don't have that financial background to understand how to communicate
Yeah.
with the bean counters, with the accounting people, to get them to understand where they're coming from.
With the
Right? It's a
suits.
double-edged sword.
You can't talk to the suits.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And they're not comfortable with it.
No.
So they avoid it. And they know that people are watching them, so they have performance metrics, but I've seen so many performance metrics that are almost totally useless. They don't really tell you very much. They might have found a book on performance measure KPIs, or they might have even looked in my own book and they've picked a few out. Okay, we can measure that one, we can measure that one. They really don't know what they're looking at, they're not really trying to use those metrics as a way of understanding what's going on. They're more scorekeeping, and scorekeeping doesn't tell you what's going on. It just tells you what.
My favorite is they want this KPI, they want to put this measure in place, and there's no concept of where that data is going to come from to support that KPI. And then they do all these maturations and deviations from the original measure just so that they can say they've measured it.
Yeah.
And so now what does the number mean? Nothing.
Exactly. And they think MTBF is a good measure for reliability, for mean time between failure and that. And if you think of something that fails on average every 3 years, that's a long time between failures. It takes you a long time to collect that information. If you make a reliability,
COVID make that number even more convoluted. Right?
Well, it's probably going to stretch it out and make it look a little bit better. But it's going to take years to see it. And that's the problem with it. It's very much a lagging measure, and it lags by years, not just behind. It's not like driving with the rear view mirror. This is like driving with the rear view mirror 2 years ago. It's not a measure that changes rapidly unless the asset is incredibly unreliable and you make an improvement. If the assets are reasonably reliable, as most generally are, you're not going to see a change in that for a very long time. If I improve something with a 3-year time between failure to maybe 4 years, right? That's a 33% improvement. That's big, but I'm not going to know about it for 4 years. I can't confirm it until then because I have to wait for it to fail again.
Yeah.
So it's a measure that people often use, and it really doesn't tell you much. It's not incorrect to use it for reliability purposes, but it's as a performance metric, it's terrible. And people just don't think about it that way. I need a reliability measure. They've heard MTBF before, so let's use that. And it's also not that difficult to get out of your maintenance management system. What's difficult to get out of it is the actual failures. Maintenance systems are record-keeping systems for maintenance transactions, right? I did a job. Well, you can't just count the number of jobs, because the job might have been a repair for something that broke. It might have been something proactive for something that didn't break. And you wouldn't want to count that in measuring that MTBF. Yet so many people don't think about these things. And it's just a lack of understanding. So the metrics aren't always all that helpful, even if they have them. The level of knowledge, the inquisitiveness, if you will, of many of the folks in maintenance is just not there. Frankly, they're used to being, having their costs cut year over year over year, and being kind of mistreated, if you will, by accounting, and when things go wrong, all the pressure is on them to get it fixed. You're a hero for a minute after something's working again, and then you're forgotten. They're kind of used to being ignored and not really appreciated. And so don't expect
We're not
heroics.
wanting
Not
to be
right.
in the front lines anyways, because it means that something's gone wrong.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So they don't jump at improvement opportunities because they're often not even looking for it. They're way too busy just trying to keep up with all the stuff that's going wrong around them today. And if they're not that busy, then people say, "Oh, we don't need that many of you." They may be doing proactive stuff; they're not doing repairs, but it looks like they're not as busy.
Yeah.
And the
No respect.
panic level is down. So everybody that's not in maintenance thinks, "Oh my God, they're not that busy. Maybe we don't need as many." So they cut the numbers.
No
Um,
respect.
it's just about every intuitive decision made by accountants when it comes to maintenance is wrong.
That's it. We're doing a full episode on just operators and just bigging them up. We're gonna just do a full episode on giving them
Interesting.
confidence.
Yeah. Well, there's
Sounds
operators,
good.
there's accountants. Maintenance interacts with just about every department in one way or another.
Yeah, they need more love, man. They need more love.
It sounds silly, but you're absolutely right. They really do. They're not well appreciated at all. Kind of like fire departments, right? Like you got these buildings full of nice, clean red trucks, that sit there most of the time, not doing too much. And nobody really appreciates them until there's a fire.
Exactly.
All right. And yet most fire departments, if you know any firemen and talk to them about what they do, they spend a huge amount of time actually educating people on how to prevent fires, how to avoid them, safe ways of storing things,
Yeah.
safe ways, to do things so that the risk of fire goes down. That's what they spend
Exactly.
most of the time on.
That's how you fight something. You prevent it you
Yeah,
prevent
but most
yourself from
people,
fighting it in the first place.
honestly don't know. They don't appreciate that at all. They're only appreciated when there's a fire. And maintenance is pretty much the same way.
Yeah.
Yep, very much so. I remember when I worked at the airport, the firefighters were, throwing darts or what have you, or taking it easy. And someone came in and said, "What are they doing? They should be working." I'm going, "I'm happy they're here because that means there's no fire out in the airfield, no fire out in the airport."
Yeah.
So, yeah, we had a lot of preventative maintenance work for them to do in terms of inspections. But when they had their break, they had their break.
Yeah.
And I think, these analogies are really good with the fire department. There's another analogy that I'm going to make here, and I think it speaks to human nature. We all know that exercise is good for us, right?
Yes.
Nobody
amazing.
usually argues against doing exercise, right?
Yeah.
But how many of us actually do it on a regular basis, right? And we're not doing that preventive work to stay healthy.
Yeah.
So we have these incredibly costly healthcare systems that are really focused on fixing what broke.
Reactive.
Our healthcare systems are designed for a reactive approach to healthcare. Fix you after you get sick, right? We don't avoid the causes of cancer. We don't avoid the chemicals and toxins in our food, the additional hormones and things like that ultimately lead to problems with our health. We'd rather just wait until we get sick and kind of roll the dice, because not everybody's going to get sick. And if you happen to be one of the unlucky ones that gets cancer, well, okay, your number's up. You're going to go sooner than you might otherwise.
Yeah.
And the whole medical system is set up to treat that one person, right, or that person that gets sick. There's nothing set up to actually prevent,
keep a population healthy.
keep you actually healthy. Yeah, and I think it's human nature.
Well, as a result of that, that's why you have this issue over COVID, right? Because we're set up to be reactive and not preventative, our healthcare system with COVID has become overwhelmed.
Yeah.
As a result,
can't handle large numbers of people all sick with the same thing.
Exactly.
So they die. Simple. All right. Until we got a vaccine. And we fight against the one thing, like this is, I get almost a chuckle out of it, but it's kind of a sadistic chuckle. the very people that are saying, oh, you're cringing on my rights, it's my body, I decide what goes into it, blah, 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 blah. Right. I'm sure that not one of them is saying that the minute that they're inserting the breathing tubes on the ventilator. And I heard that from a doctor on the news just last night.
Yeah.
They all regret not doing the vaccine as they're being intubated.
Exactly. It's always 20/20 hindsight.
Yeah. And I mean, even with our own health, every one of us has probably not done all the exercise that we probably should have, and we've probably had some regrets over it.
Man.
And it shows with our COVID weight that we're putting on.
Yep, it does, and it shows in healthcare, it shows in COVID, it shows in the fire department the way that they're set up. They're not a fire prevention department; they're a fire department. Just the name tells you something. Maintenance is much the same way. When you ask people, what do you do in maintenance? Oh, well, we fix things that break. And maintainers will say that. And the emphasis is on the task, the doing of the task.
Yeah.
The emphasis isn't on the result that we're trying to achieve, which in my opinion is reliability and availability of the assets to be productive.
Yeah.
We don't have we don't have reliability departments. We don't have availability departments. We have maintenance departments. So the emphasis is on the task, not the result.
Yeah.
And I think our thinking needs to be changed a little bit, and maybe simple little changes like, what do we call it, might help to begin that transition. And we've definitely got to educate people with business backgrounds, because they really don't get it. Once it's explained to them, they're smart people. So once it's explained to them, they're on board. I have had several clients where the CFO is my number one ally in terms of being a change agent. And it's because he sees the benefit. But it had to be explained to them. They didn't understand it from their own background. But once
it also calls for that aha moment, I'll call it, where they make the connection of what it is you're trying to say and explain. It takes that trigger.
And it's like turning a light on. It's just all of a sudden, oh my God, I get it. And they want the productivity because they want the revenue. They want the margins that come from higher levels of production. They want the margins that come from the lower cost. It's actually, reliable operations are actually cheaper to maintain than an unreliable one. And, to those of us that work in the field, that's kind of intuitively obvious, but to anybody else, it's not. Like spend the money on the proactive stuff, and you won't be spending it on the fixes. And the fixes are by far more expensive.
Like 5 times more. Yeah.
Well, there's the numbers range from 2.5 up to about 14. I think it's the highest I've ever seen. The cost of fixing things once they break is usually very high, and that's just the cost of fixing it. That's not including the cost of the production that you just lost because it's down. And these things never break when they're idle. They break when they're being used for production. So there's always a disruption factor that goes along with it. It's like, it's like your car, a brake failure on your car isn't really an issue until it happens while you're driving. And it's never going to happen while you're parked.
Yep, exactly.
There you go.
So there's just some thoughts.
So to the time travelers who went back in time and listened to this podcast to see what they should have done to save society at hand, there you go. We need a paradigm shift in maintenance and corporate culture, it sounds like, too.
Yeah, I
very much so.
What I'm concerned with is that as we're still in this COVID paralysis, if you will, of conserving cash. And I get why companies want to conserve cash. I do it in my own. But it's also a really good time, as Richard pointed out, with his customers right now. This is the time to invest in those assets. Spend some money to make sure that they're in good shape, so that when you do go back up to those high levels of utilization, they'll keep running. And too many companies are not doing that. There is an opportunity here to do that. There are methods out there to help capture knowledge of workers, that are leaving. I'm using those same methods with one client right now where it's all new hires because it's a brand new facility. We're actually developing the maintenance program before they started up. And they're learning a tremendous amount about the assets that they're going to be maintaining just from going through this
Yeah.
analysis. They don't have all the answers, so they got to go find out. And they're asking the manufacturer, they're going to the installers. They're sitting back and thinking about it sort of from more or less from first principles. And these are all young people doing it. They're capable, but they have to be asked the right questions. And that doesn't happen without some structure. So there's ways to do it, and it's not too late. But pretty soon it will be too late, and you'll be playing catch up, and you're going to be
Yeah.
competing for the help that's out there if you're playing catch up.
That's the truth.
Yep.
So that's my rant.
So you
Sorry.
want to wrap it up here?
Well, you know what? We're actually doing like we're harmoniously are at the end of the episode. Like I think we naturally kind of ended around that time where we're at an hour almost. So I think we covered a lot, but we got to keep advocating. So we got to keep this up because we got to get that message out there. Sounds like
next episode of
Yep.
Beer and Picknell, Beer gets to talk the most and Picknell can add in the flavoring. How's that?
there you go.
There you go.
I almost felt like I talked too much here. I get so passionate about this. I can't
No, we
help myself.
need that.
I think it
We-
was a good interaction. I think I interjected where I thought it was relevant.
Mhm. It's tantalizing stuff. I think
Does that
we
mean you
need
kept
to-
quiet while you thought I was irrelevant?
Oh,
I love
or I
that.
thought my contribution would be relevant.
Love that.
It was. It indeed actually enhanced it quite nicely.
Yeah, you guys.
We're dealing with very different clients, so that experience,
Yeah.
it's kind of, well, it's only two of us, but I'm hearing it from other people as well. What we're seeing,
sure.
and
Very much so.
others are seeing as well.
That's the other thing I find, right, is that you do all these great investments in sensors and predictive maintenance, and you do your inspections, and then all that data just ends up sitting on someone's shelf. Nothing
Yeah,
done
sure.
about it.
No one does anything about it.
I was in Botswana doing work with Deb Swan of the Diamond Company and the predictive maintenance engineers. They actually had crews to do predictive maintenance, condition monitoring. They were all, without exception, frustrated at the fact that they they'd find problems, they'd create these work requests, and then the maintenance supervisors would cancel them.
Like, nah, not for me.
And it was that the supervisors didn't understand being proactive, and it was a lack of understanding. They thought, quite truthfully, that maintenance was here to fix things. And doing all this stuff before it breaks, that doesn't make any sense at all. So they'd cancel them. And of course, the engineers were really frustrated. The supervisors were frustrated at getting all these requests from these engineers. And it was all because of supervisors not really understanding what it was for, and the fact that, hey, it's actually cheaper to fix it now and take it out of service when it's convenient to do so, rather than to wait until it breaks.
Don't wait till it breaks.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for now. Thanks for tuning in, and always be prepared for your business life and loved ones.
It's been a pleasure. Bye for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Cheers.